Hey, Earthlings. So, just a disclaimer, this is not an attack video, this is about the movement's history. I just recently seen a video by Grumpy Vegan Grandad, really interesting one about green energy and wind turbines, etc., etc. And there was some concern expressed there from Danny himself and also in the comments about Joanna Lumley, and particularly because she's not a vegan, and also how could she not be a vegan because she's worked with Viva. And so I just thought I'd try and put this a little bit into context, if I can, from a kind of historical point of view. The general context is that vegan education is pretty new. It's a 21st century phenomena, and so up until the turn of the century, this kind of campaigning that we're used to now, with veganism being central, or in kind of Francion's terms, veganism being the moral baseline, this never really happened. It was all kind of single issues back then, right up until around about, you could say that vegan education was really starting to get going by the mid 1990s. But even then, it was all pretty kind of small beer at the time. Even groups like Vegan Outreach in the United States, they weren't really going until the late 1990s. And so we are talking about a kind of fairly new phenomena. Added to that, we've got the issue that until very, very recently, and we're talking about the last few years, 5 years maximum, the national groups were a little bit wary of the word vegan, and so for some, veganism really was a scare word, and you had people like the so-called vegan strategist Tobias Leonhardt telling vegans that very thing, that we should not use the word vegan too much because it's very off-putting, and we shouldn't use phrases like animal rights, and we shouldn't use phrases like speciesism. Now these are kind of like the central part of our kind of claims making now. But there was these so-called experts trying to tell us that it wasn't a great idea to use them, and this fed into the national groups, who were very wary of using them. So if we think about Joanna Lumley, who's a vegetarian, and her work for Viva, well, this makes complete sense, and it might be more difficult for really recent vegans to kind of twig why this is. But Viva, their name is Vegetarian International Voice for Animals. That's what Viva means. But they've kind of rebranded themselves as a kind of vegan, I think they call it itself a vegan charity. As far as I know, in terms of company house or the registration of Viva, I think it's still called officially Vegetarian International Voice for Animals. And if it's not, then that change is being quite recent. See, what kind of happened was, you had people like the vegan strategists telling everyone that veganism was a scare word. And in fact, the VIP, the group that I'm an organising volunteer for, we had a whole series of memes or posters saying that veganism is not a scare word. And essentially, we've won the argument. So all these kind of experts and people working in the national groups who thought that veganism is a scare word have been proven wrong. And so I believe now that people like Melanie Joy and Tobias Leonhardt, they've kind of changed their tune a little bit. Instead of warning people away from veganism, they themselves now have embraced it. And the same goes for the national groups. Joanna Lumley used to work a lot with Compassion in World Farming, along with people like the late great Spike Milligan. They used to give Compassion in World Farming petitions into Downing Street and that kind of stuff, kind of be locked into a human version of the battery cage and all that. And so, Compassion World Farming is not a vegan organisation, never has been. It was started in 1967 by a dairy farmer. And so we really need to get our kind of head around the difference between animal welfare groups and animal rights groups. Compassion World Farming is an animal welfare group in a more kind of traditional sense. When you get people like Viva and Animal Aid, you're into the kind of new welfare groups, but they were very kind of guarded about being open about their veganism. It could well be that for many, many years, all of the people behind these groups and all the people working for these groups and all the people volunteering for these groups in terms of outreach, they were most likely, in the vast majority, vegans themselves. It's just that they didn't tend to kind of really want to go there because of this thing that they were persuaded, by these strategists, that veganism was a scare word. And so, for example, until very recently, Viva used to have a vegetarian starter kit. You used to get quite a lot of major groups that would put out some fairly graphic materials. And at the end, they would say, "Go veg." So it's only recently that veganism as we know it now has really been set up as the centre part of what we do. And I just thought it was be useful for people to kind of understand this. We're into new territory here from the animal movement's point of view. It's really interesting. It's kind of like we're breaking new ground in historical terms. Now, 10 years, 20 years might seem a lot for people who've been very recent vegans, but it's not. I mean, this can be traced back even to the beginning of the vegan social movement and the vegan society, when they asked the vegetarians if they could have a non-dairy section, and the vegetarians said no, which I think was a good thing, because that would mean that the vegan movement would have been kind of part and parcel, a little chunk of the vegetarian movement, whereas the vegetarians said no, so the vegans struck out on their own and then actually invented the name vegan. So that ended up being a good thing. But what I'm saying is the vegetarians were wary of the word vegan. And right up to only about 5 years ago, a lot of the groups, the major groups in the movement, have been wary of the vegan word, and they prefer to say veggie and go veg and these kind of ideas, because they don't want to scare their non-vegan supporters away, and so it's just part and parcel of the history of our movement. And so I just thought I'd put it out there rather than just put it as a comment, in the sense that this kind of issue comes back over and over. Why isn't that person a vegan? Why isn't this group doing that or saying this and everything? Well, in terms of a kind of very clear and consistent vegan message, that is new in our movement. It's only happened this century, that's all. And the vegan movement has been going since 1944. It's taken us a long time to get to where we are. And in that sense, we've only just begun. So if anybody tells you, as few people do in the movement, that we've been doing vegan education for decades and decades and decades and it hasn't worked, that's not true. We've only just started. We're onto a new thing. So this is just the history of our movement. And so, I'm putting it out there. So, yeah, well, that's it, I suppose. So, thanks, Earthlings. See you again, and take care.